Hi guys, it's Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Marc Zicree of Space Command, and I'm here at the Writers Guild, hence the floral arrangement, and in the wonderful Writers Guild Lounge, which I'll talk about some other time, but it's great to be in the Writers Guild, and Star Trek writer Marc Zicree, Space Command writer Marc Zicree, director, producer, Twilight Zone companion, Smurfs, everything. So you know who I am. So I wanted to talk today about Star Trek Discovery Episode 10, which I just watched, and it is a mirror universe episode, so cool. So we'll get into that, and it's an episode I actually really liked. I think the show is finding its way, or one could say that it just had a slow start and it always knew where it was going because they plotted out the entire season and then wrote it. And but let's talk about it. There will be spoilers, so ideally you will have watched this episode before you watch me, but let's just dive in. So one of the best aspects of the Star Trek franchise, one of the most fun aspects, is the mirror universe. And as a producer who was also on Sliders, in addition to having written for Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and of course World Enough in Time, the George Takei Star Trek New Voyages episode, I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I started watching it when I was a kid, and one of my favorite episodes, and many people's favorite, of the original series was an episode called Mirror Mirror. And that was an episode where Kirk and Uhura and Scotty and McCoy found themselves in an alternate parallel universe where the Enterprise was populated by evil versions of themselves and and their crew, and their alternates had gone to our universe. And it was basically patterned sort of on a very evil Roman Empire kind of notion, if the Federation were evil and had an empire rather than a federation. And it was a great episode. It was written by Jerome Bixby, who was one of the top science fiction writers of the era. He also wrote the short story "It's a Good Life" that was made into a Twilight Zone episode starring Bill Mumy, which actually just inspired USS Callister on Black Mirror that I just talked about. So Jerome Bixby's influence has been widespread. Now, sadly, of course, he wrote Mirror Mirror, came up with the mirror universe, but because it wasn't, because they've done sequels that don't just basically, when you wrote for Star Trek, you signed off all rights, and so he didn't get paid additional monies for the various later iterations of the mirror universe stories. But most of the Star Trek series, one way or another, have done mirror universe stories set in that evil universe. Mirror Mirror was terrific. Wonderful. George Takei and Walter Koenig did a great job playing evil versions of themselves. George Takei had a great big scar, and the uniforms looked great. They were kind of barbarian variations of the Star Trek uniform, and it was just a fun episode. It was also more or less a bottle show because bottle shows where you can do most of the episode or all of it on your standing sets, just redressing them slightly. The Doomsday Machine is another bottle show. Producers love bottle shows because they can do them for a lower budget than where they have to build a huge number of sets. In Mirror Mirror, they have one other set, which is just sort of the Halkan Council, where we're trying to get dilithium crystals from this planet, and they don't want to give them to us. And in our universe, of course, we let them do that. And in the evil alternative, we're going to destroy them. And Vic Perrin plays the head of the Halkans, and Vic Perrin was, of course, the control voice on Outer Limits, and so it's great fun all around. And just to get into it a bit, various of the Star Trek series have visited the mirror universe one way or another. They did it on Deep Space Nine, they did it on Enterprise, and it's funny because Chris Black, who was a writer on Enterprise, was a writer as well on Sliders, on which I was a producer, and we were both huge Trekkies, and we used to joke that if you were a real Star Trek fan, someone could say the bearded Spock, and you would know exactly what that is, which is, of course, in Mirror Mirror, Spock had a goatee, he looked really good, and it was that notion that the evil version of Spock was very similar to the good version, quote-unquote, because being a logical creature, he would be very, very similar, and in both universes, which proved to be the case. It's a wonderful episode. If you haven't seen Mirror Mirror, I urge you to go see it immediately. It's great fun, wonderfully done, wonderfully written, wonderfully acted. And they haven't ever done the mirror universe in the Star Trek features as yet. That might be somewhere for them to go. They have done it, of course, in the novels, and I assume the comic books. Garfield and Judith Reeves Stevens, who wrote a number of novels with William Shatner, wrote several in the mirror universe where Kirk becomes the Emperor, and they were very, very fun. So the episode of Star Trek Discovery last night had two great elements. They finally revealed that the human who ostensibly has PTSD and was tortured by the Klingons and was the love slave of one of the Klingon females, is actually a Klingon in disguise. And I think where they're going to is, in the original Star Trek series, the Klingons looked human. In the later iterations, they look like Klingons. And so this will explain sort of how that happened. In Star Trek The Next Generation, a character once asked Worf why there were certain Klingons who looked like humans, and he kind of glowered and said, we don't speak of that. There was also another Star Trek episode that did get into that in detail, but I think they may be doing something different here, where the idea is there's genetic modification and lots of experiments to make them look human. I actually, years ago for Star Trek The Next Generation, I actually pitched an episode that would have explained why some of the Klingons looked human. The notion being that there was a Klingon war strategist who basically, like the art of war kind of thing, where his strategy was to beat your enemy, you have to become your enemy. And so there were a whole group of Klingons who were made to look human, altered to look human, but then they become pariahs among their own kind. It was a really fun episode. It didn't ultimately get made, but I outlined it, and it was a lot of fun to play with that notion, with that world. But here on Star Trek Discovery, they're doing this, and he's going to turn out to be a Klingon, of course. Really interesting. He kills the Doctor. Interesting turn. And Anthony Rapp, by the way, is in his character has been through been the navigator too long. He's kind of gone into freak out mode, and he says, "Don't go into the palace, and the enemies are among us." And one truth, of course, in film and TV is if someone's in kind of some weird trance and they say something, they give you some piece of advice. Always listen to it. Always listen to it. They're always right. It's just like in any movie, any crackpot theory, no matter how ludicrous, turns out to be true. And so there's certain rules of thumb. For instance, if you ever see a tanker truck in a movie, it's going to explode. Things like that. If you see a group of men dressed identically and they're all carrying briefcases, they're all going to be a terrorist cell, and there's going to be guns in those briefcases. There's certain rules of the road. So, but getting back to Star Trek Discovery, the other fun thing was our guys turn out to be in the mirror universe. Tilly turns out to be an evil captain in that universe, so she has to pretend to be that captain. She gets to have long blonde hair. She looks good. The variant uniform looks good because it's a barbarian version, and Michael gets to be a captain of her own ship, and so on and so forth. The twists and turns are great fun. They're saying the Emperor is mysterious, and I'm sure they'll reveal who that is. That'll be interesting to see who it turns out to be. We'll find out. Maybe it'll be Captain Pike. We don't know. We'll find out. But certainly won't be Kirk, because this takes place before Kirk's helming the Enterprise. So beyond other things, this was directed by Jonathan Frakes, who of course played Riker in Star Trek The Next Generation. I've met Jonathan a number of times. He's a really great guy, and we had talked at one point about working together, and that might still be something that happens, and it could be great fun. Additionally, Star Trek Continues did a very good sequel to Mirror Mirror. Michael Reeves and I, we wrote World Enough in Time together, the George Takei Star Trek episode, which is on Mr. Sci-Fi. You can watch it in its entirety. It was nominated for the Hugo and Nebula. Michael and I were approached to write a sequel to Mirror Mirror for Star Trek Continues by Vic Mignogna, who plays Kirk, and he's kind of the showrunner of that fan series. I was very tempted. I love Mirror Mirror, but things didn't work out. That was fine. But they went on to do a very good script and a very good episode. The thing with the Star Trek fan films, whether it's Star Trek New Voyages or Star Trek Continues, is you have other actors playing those roles, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, etc., and you have to kind of accept that as the rule of the game, and sometimes the acting can be a little shaky, etc. Vic Mignogna is a pro in the industry. He does a lot of voiceovers for Japanese cartoons, etc. Really a good guy. But the problem is that unless you're doing Kirk and doing your own interpretation of Kirk, if you're trying to do Shatner, here's my feeling about Shatner. Shatner is the greatest bad actor of all time. I've said this before. He's astonishing. He's wonderful, but he has these mannerisms, these things that he does that no other actor can pull off. And Khan, and Nicholas Meyer talked about working again and again over take after take after take to kind of wear Shatner down so he wouldn't be doing his affectations, but would actually be delivering a performance. But Shatner is wonderful, iconic, but he's the only one who can do his version of Kirk. And if someone else tries, it's just an impression, it's exterior, it's not internalized, and so it comes across as, those mannerisms just don't work for any other actor. And so again, when I was working with James Cawley, and Elaine was working, co-directing with me on it for Star Trek New Voyages, we were trying to move him away from doing Shatner, quote unquote, and delivering a performance, feeling the emotion of being in the moment, as any good actor has to be. So But getting back to Star Trek Discovery, it's a fun episode, and I think ongoingly Star Trek Discovery will be a lot of fun. I think being in the mirror universe is a very fun choice. I think having that character turn out to be a Klingon in disguise is a very fun choice. So it's picking up steam. I think it's finding its footing. I think it's going to be a very interesting second half of its first season. So I would urge you to watch it. Beyond that, also just in terms of drama, the notion of the evil twin has had a great currency in any number of shows, any number of novels and movies, and of course, a mirror universe gives us a universe of evil twins, and so that's one of the things that makes it so appealing. And of course, because it's like a futuristic version of the Roman Empire, you can get all the darkness of the Roman empires. I mean, the original Star Trek did a Roman Empire world, but that was kind of hokey and goofy. Whereas the notion of the sense that the Roman Empire just continued and went out into space. And again, this is only suggested; it's not overt. And of course, different iterations of the mirror universe in the novels and so forth. The novels are not canon, so to speak, but different iterations of the mirror universe in Star Trek are going to have different backstories. But I think the more you delve into the mirror universe, the more you watch those episodes. The challenge always with mirror universe episodes, is the actors have to be very good at playing evil versions of themselves. The one that they did on Enterprise was okay, but some of the actors really couldn't quite pull that off, and so it made it less fun than it might otherwise have been. Whereas, of course, on the original Star Trek episode, all the ones who are called upon to play evil versions of themselves are wonderful doing that, and it's very fun to see Walter Koenig and George Takei play those evil versions. They really go for it. Beyond that, it's going to be very interesting to see where they go, what they do. I'm glad I've stuck with Star Trek Discovery. I'm glad I'm still watching it. And now it's dealing with xenophobia and all of those things, so it's commenting on the modern day in a certain way. So that's good. That's good. I think let's give it the chance, and let's see where it heads. It's not the original Star Trek. It's not like other Star Trek shows, but that's a good thing. Again, I think of Star Trek like Hamlet, or Sherlock Holmes, where it's proven itself as an enduring fictional universe. And you can have bad performances, bad interpretations of Hamlet. You can have bad performances and bad interpretations of Sherlock Holmes, but there'll always be good ones coming up, and everyone is going to be different in their opinion in their responses. But the lovely thing, and here's something also to mention. I've mentioned before that when Star Trek first aired when I was a kid, I recorded each episode on reel-to-reel tape just in case it never aired again. Because back then, before VCRs, before home video, if you saw a TV show and it failed after a season or two, you would never see it again. It would never resurface. And now we can watch whatever show, whatever movie we want, with some exceptions, of course, but by and large, even on YouTube, there's great stuff. And for instance, the Lazarus Man episode I wrote that starred Anthony Rapp, I just put it on Mr. Sci-Fi. And I'll be putting more of sort of my canon of work on Mr. Sci-Fi if it's a show that didn't run more than a few seasons or whatever, because people have a right to see good work and see their favorite actors in lesser-known roles. But the whole point about Star Trek is we can watch the original Star Trek, we can watch Next Gen or DS9 or Voyager or Enterprise or the various Star Trek movies, and if there's ones we don't like or ones that aren't as fun, well, on to the next one. And I'm really glad we have Star Trek Discovery. I'm really glad we have the Orville. I'm really glad we're going to have we have the USS Callister, which I've heard is going to be a series. That'll be interesting to see what they do. And of course, Space Command. And Space Command, all of these are different interpretations of that promise of a hopeful future. And some are more dark, some are more cynical, some are more goofy. Space Command, I think, fits right in with being unironic and hopeful and positive and compassionate. Guillermo del Toro, with whom I wrote a novel, I'm sorry, not a novel, but a nonfiction book, Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities, Guillermo talked about Shape of Water and the fact that it took courage to not be ironic, not be cynical, to tell a story that believed in love and believing in the redemptive power of love. And certainly I share that opinion, which is one of the reasons why Guillermo and I worked so well together, and I think we'll work together again. Because Space Command has that same, it's not hokey, it's not rose-colored glasses, but it is positive. And I think there's room for a positive vision that isn't ironic or meta or cynical or silly. So you can check out we've posted scenes from Space Command, we've posted trailers. We're busy at work completing VFX we've shot the 2-hour pilot, we shot 35 minutes of the second one. I'm busy writing the entire first season now. I've written 8 hours and I'm rewriting the third 2-hour story, The Great Solar War. I think you'll really like it. And Doug Jones is terrific in Space Command, as is Robert Picardo, Mira Furlan, Bill Mumy, Bruce Boxleitner, James Hong, Farhan Tahir, John Hennigan. I love our cast. Not to mention Ethan McDowell, Brian McClure, on and on and on, with many more to come. So, and by the way, we just had a crowdfunding campaign. If you'd like to buy shares in Space Command, you certainly can. You can just call me at 323-363-1259 or email me at marczicree@gmail.com. There's plenty of room for all of this. But getting back to Star Trek Discovery, I think it's worth watching. And if you want to see the lineage of the Mirror Universe stories, check out Mirror Mirror on the original Star Trek. Check out Star Trek Continues and watch there. It's a direct sequel to Mirror Mirror, so it ends exactly as that first episode. It begins as that first episode ends. And so it's almost like you have a 2-hour story where previously there had been a 1-hour story. And I think it's very credible and very well done. And you can watch the other iterations of the Mirror Universe in the various iterations of Star Trek. So that's it for now. Mr. Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi. We're posting a little more often than usual, simply because it's been the holidays. I've had time on my hands, and also there's been a lot of great science fiction TV shows and movies released in the last few months. So happy 2018. We'll talk again soon. And again, thanks for everything you do. Take care. Bye-bye.